Okay, the mics are on and we're live. Ben just said I'm feeling my inner MAGA.
Got the MAGA hat on, ladies and gentlemen.
It's not a MAGA hat. It's a Bulls hat.
It's a. But one of our listeners said, "Is Ben wearing a MAGA hat?" Remember
that? I know, and we said no.
Oh yeah, let's recreate.
We'd like to keep our listeners, Ben.
Not a MAGA hat. I saw the Larry David show where he wore the MAGA hat. Not doing it.
The goal's to keep the listeners, not chase them away. All right, everybody, your Ben Joravsky show for Wednesday, February 12th is just moments away. But before we get into that, okay, get your papers all settled there, buddy. I'm trying to do a sponsor read.
Oh, sorry, man.
Come on. The Ben Joravsky show is just moments away. But before we get into that, we got to thank the following unions for jumping on board and sponsoring this program. Unions like the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 126 and District 8.
That's correct.
The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9.
That's correct.
The International Union Operating Engineers, Local 150.
That's correct.
And, of course, today's Ben Joravsky show for Wednesday, February 12th, is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor.
Big problems become big problems when you let small problems sit.
Hold on, man. Where's the bong? I gotta think about that. Big problems become big problems. Yeah.
All right, and I think we're going to have some new intro music. Typically, I have my computer, my laptop.
Yeah.
Ben, we went to the event last night at G-Man Tavern. By the way, how was that event?
It was great, man. Samina Mustafa. Oh, my goodness.
Excellent.
Steph Skora. We had some great question and answers. There was... can I talk about it right now?
I mean, just a little bit. I mean, wouldn't go on and on about it. It's
Why?
Beginning
Why
of the
not?
show.
I got nothing else to do.
Quit pounding your hands on the table, please.
It's my Sergio invitation.
Please stop.
Steph Skora was from Girl, I Guess, gave this passionate plea as to why she would not support any candidate other than Bernie. And then some of the listeners in the audience took exception to that. We had a great debate. How about that? It's on my mind right now. That's been on my mind ever since. So that was just one of the highlights of the show.
Well, a low light of the show is that I left my backpack in Ben's car, and my computer was in the backpack, and I don't have my computer, so we're just going to have to do some new intro music for today's show. But first, we did the sponsor read. Ben, song of the day.
Oh, why don't we just do that as the music?
Nah.
Hey, hey, where the monkeys? Hey, where the monkey around? I don't know why I'm thinking of that song, but I am.
It's an awful one. The Ben Joravsky Show starts now.
Ooh, I like that music.
It is Wednesday, February 12th, and live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is a very dramatic Ben Joravsky Show. Today on the program, suspense as legendary Chicago journalist Monroe Anderson returns, and surprise when we welcome Pollster Dan Cohen. And now your host, no suspense, no surprise, Chicago Reader columnist Ben Joravsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Joravsky here. We're calling this Happy Birthday, Abe Wednesday. And here's why. It's Lincoln's birthday. Woo-woo! Not really relevant to anything I'm going to say, D, but I just thought we'd pay, homage to the greatest president this country's ever had, in my humble opinion. I will now list the 3 greatest presidents this country's ever had. Number 1, Abraham. Wait, you don't even have that thing?
Don't even. No, I don't have
Number 1.
Don't have my computer.
Abraham Lincoln. Number 2. Oh, my God, you can't do those,
Don't remind me. Just do the intro.
Those things were no, but you just did Mueller. Oh, sorry. Number 2, FDR. And number 3, I'm going to go with Dennis's. He said, when I said, who do you think the 3 greatest presidents of all time? He goes, Jimmy Carter? Good enough for me. He's probably the greatest post-president of all time. Think about that. Anyway, I would say that pretty much everybody listening to this show would agree that the current occupant of the office is nowhere near that list. That would be one Donald John Trump. And that brings me to what I really want to talk about, sort of the selective outrage that exists in Republican land here in Chicago over Smollett-gate as opposed to Donald John Trump-gate. Everything's a Trump-gate with Trump. Smollett-gate, as you know, has to do with Jussie Smollett. Pages of the newspapers are filled with stories. Here they are about how he was indicted again for the same old charges of staging a hate crime. We've talked about this obsessively for several months. We'll probably be talking about it obsessively for the next few months. I have to admit, I do have an obsession with this case. Celebrityhood, it has everything you need. It's got MAGA hats. It's got celebrity. It has fantasy world. It has somebody making a phone call on somebody's behalf, which is so classic Chicago. Of course, in total significance, I agree 100% with Maya when she said it wouldn't even rank among the top 20 criminal justice issues facing the city of Chicago, facing the county of Cook. But nonetheless, when was the last time we let significance get in the way of being obsessed with the story, right, D?
Right.
People are obsessed with celebrity all the time. So anyway, the papers are filled. Front page story, Smollett faces new raft of charges. That's the Tribune headline. And the Sun-Times, Smollett sequel. None of them are using Smollett-gate. Yeah, they're falling down on the job. Empire actor, indicted again for allegedly staging hate crimes. First thing I thought when I read the story was, how can you be charged for the same thing twice? See, I'm not a lawyer, all right? I read a lot of legal novels. I watch a lot of legal TV shows and movies. But I called Jim Coogan, our ace attorney, who comes on the show about once a month to discuss Trump's crimes and misdemeanors, and he explained to me that a charge is different than actually a trial. He was never tried. He was never convicted or acquitted in a trial. So essentially, you can charge him twice. You can't convict him twice. You can't convict him after he's been acquitted. So thank you for that explanation, Jim Coogan. Anyway. This is the interesting thing about this. My good friends at the Chicago Tribune are outraged. They are outraged by what went down. They wrote one column. Johnny Cass wrote a column about it. The Tribune's editorial board wrote a column about it. They're outraged at Kim Foxx, Cook County State's attorney. They can't believe, oh my God, that she would allow this injustice to continue. Just the favorable treatment that Justice Smollett got. It's just outrage, okay? Outrageous. Meanwhile, not one word about Donald John Trump. In fact, the Tribune's story about Donald Trump is buried on page, hold on. There we go, page 10. Front page news in the New York Times. Donald John Trump, the Justice Department, ordered the lawyers who are overseeing the trial of Roger Stone to lower their sentencing recommendations. In Stone's case, Stone, of course, a former ally, longtime ally of Donald Trump. He was indicted on corruption charges having to do with fallout from the Mueller report investigation. Donald Trump, just imagine, folks, if you can, if Kim Foxx treated the investigation into her misdeeds the way Donald Trump treats the investigation into his. She would be tweeting out on a regular basis denunciations of the prosecutors. She would name the prosecutors. She would name the investigators in the prosecutor's office. She would dig up any dirt that she had on the prosecutors. So just imagine just going through Dan Webbs, who was the prosecutor, the special prosecutor who looked into the Smollett Gate. Just imagine if she just looked into his background, dug up anything resembling dirt on him, and just started tweeting it out to undercut the legitimacy of the credibility of his indictment. She would attack the Tribune, fake news, biased media. She would attack by name the columnists who speak out against her. She would attack by name the editorial board. She would name the editorial board. Just imagine that. She would intimidate anybody from daring to investigate her. Just imagine that, huh, D? That's what Donald Trump is doing right now with Roger Stone. Not one word from the Tribune on that. Not one word from the right on that. Here's the thing, man. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I've been practicing journalism in town for a long, long time. I was taught to go after Democrats and Republicans. When they do something wrong, you investigate them, you write about them, you ask them the questions, you put it out there. I've written stories condemning all the powerhouses in the Democratic machine going back to the 80s, into the 90s, into the O's. Generally, when I did that, I could expect some alliance from my Republican friends at the Chicago Tribune. Well, not if it was a TIF story. They stayed away from TIF stories because, you know, that was a handout that took care of the well-to-do and the powers that be. But, you know, any run-of-the-mill a run-of-the-mill story having to do with Democratic wrongdoings of state reps, aldermen, et cetera, and so forth. Democratic corruption. I could generally expect them to side with me or be writing about it as well. But not one word about Donald Trump. The double standards dealing with Donald Trump and his outrage makes it that much harder at this advanced stage of my career, D, to play the game. Just play. Supposed to play the game. Supposed to be outraged at local Democrats. But the Republicans aren't outraged at national Republicans, not outraged at Donald Trump. I don't know how long I continue to play this game. Sooner or later, I gotta get a little support on this from my friends on the right, from my friends from the Chicago Tribune's editorial board and the columnists like John Cass. Sooner or later, you got to stand up to Donald Trump. It's easy to stand up to Kim Foxx. She doesn't have that much power. She's not going to tweet you out. She's not going to denounce you. She's not going to go after the special investigators. It's something else to stand up to Donald John Trump. We got a great show today, everybody. Monroe Anderson, he's not afraid to stand up to Donald John Trump, who'll be talking about all of Trump's crimes and misdemeanors. And then Dan Cohen making, as Dennis said, his Ben Joravsky Show debut. I met him last night at the show. He was the gentleman, I think you had left by this time, D. He came up and started speaking about sort of the state of the Democratic presidential race in the aftermath of the New Hampshire primary. By the way, can we give a shout out to the Dems in New Hampshire? Remember yesterday I said, I got a feeling, D, they're going to actually count the votes on time.
Yeah, way to go.
The bar was low, I admit, with my beloved Democratic Party after they made a mess out of Iowa and a mockery of the whole system. But how about those Dems in New Hampshire? We know how to count votes.
Yeah.
All right. So Dan Cohen, a pollster for Democratic politicians, will be in the studio. We're going to break down the Democratic race, who's ahead, who's behind. What is the story with Michael Bloomberg? Do I see a Bloomberg-Bernie showdown in the future?
Oh, boy.
Could that be what's up? The Biden has done very poorly in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's really hoping that South Carolina saves him. But I don't know about Joe Biden. And then Andrew Yang dropped out of the race, D.
Yang's gone.
I got a text from Joshua Smyser, frequent guest in the show, going, who's your top three now? Remember, for the longest time, Bernie number one, Elizabeth Warren number two.
So who is your top three?
Well, Bernie number one, Elizabeth Warren number two. Well, I'll say it. If I had to go, I guess Joe Biden would be number three.
Oh, good God. Live streamers, don't go anywhere. Don't leave us, live streamers.
I'm not a wimp. I got to come up with a third.
Oh,
all right?
boy.
Oh, everybody's like, oh, no, I'm too pure. Only
Amy
Bernie.
Klobuchar?
I like Grandpa. I always kind of like Grandpa Joe. I mean, Amy Klobuchar, you know.
Live streamers, I tried.
Well, who are your top three?
Bernie,
Yeah.
Bernie, and Bernie.
Oh, is Robert Peterson in the studio?
Yeah.
All right. Let's just say you can't do Bernie. Give me top three. Go.
Whose name's that on that banner?
Wait,
It
hold
ain't
on.
Dennis.
Hold on. Come on, D. Come on out.
It ain't Dennis. No one's here to.
Yeah. All right. Top three. I guess I got to go. I'm studying Bloomberg, okay? I'm looking into Bloomberg. But man, oh man, that's the other thing. The tape on Stop and Frisk dropped yesterday. Good God. We'd be talking about that with Monroe. Oh my God. Michael Bloomberg's, the tape from, like, was it 2000 and, forget when it was. I think it was 15. Don't quote me, D. God. But you know what? He's going to be doing a lot of apologizing. That was the Stop and Frisk tape, folks, where Michael Bloomberg, I don't know where he was speaking. I don't have the story in front of me, was making these insanely law and order remarks about how, you know, this is how you get crime down. You get guns out of people's hands. You just throw them in jail. You know, that's, if you find any reefer on them, throw them into jail for reefer. Like, what? Just going to sweep people off the street? They lose their constitutional rights just because you think they may have a gun? Anyway, so he's going to be doing a lot of apologizing for that. There's going to be, he's got so much money for commercials, D. There are going to be apology commercials. Remember when JB got in trouble for the Blagojevich tapes? He went on the apology tour. I think Bloomberg's next week will be on apology tour. I'm sorry. I am sorry.
That's a pretty little problem that JB had.
Big problems become big problems when you let small problems sit.
And that is what Michael Bloomberg is saying right now. That's a big problem that came out of a small problem that was sitting. So anyway, I guess I got to see more apologies from Bloomberg, and also apologies in the charter schools. Bloomberg was a big supporter of charter schools. I have a lot of issues with charter schools because, of course, they're anti-union, anti-teachers union. They cut teachers' salary. They made it easier to fire teachers. They sort of, in many ways, they promoted the notion that teachers were the problem. Played into the hands of Republicans who said the problem with education in this country this day is teachers. And so the solution is to pay them less and make it easier to fire them, to make it less desirable for anybody to want to be a teacher. I could never understand in a million years how anybody would think that was the solution. If you have a problem with your workforce, if you think your workforce is inadequate, if you think your workforce isn't to the top of its game, what makes you think you could solve that by cutting the salaries of the people in your workforce and making it less desirable to have that job? You think you're going to attract better candidates to fill those slots? The whole charter school notion of how to treat teachers was a complete fallacy that was basically union busting. And yet, Michael Bloomberg bought into it. Rahm Emanuel bought into it. Barack Obama bought into it. Arnie Duncan bought into it. So, yeah, I got to think about that. Hey, you know what? That's something we should talk about with PC. Peter Cunningham comes into this show. He knows a thing or two about this subject. Pete and I, we don't agree on everything. But, I like to bring him on, get his thoughts. So he's coming in next week. Talk to him about Bloomberg and charter schools. That'll be interesting to talk about. So anyway, Bloomberg's not in the top 3, D, but, I keep my open mind about him.
Before we do any of that,
I forgot. I went on a tangent within a tangent. I went on a tangent before we do any of that. Before we bring on Monroe Anderson and young Daniel Cohen, the man from Alton, the man they call Dr. Doobie, with the news.
No one calls me that. Hello. Let's find out what's happening in Chicago and or Illinois this afternoon. Shout out to the live stream chat room, by the way. What were your thoughts on all things New Hampshire last night? Yang gone. What are your thoughts on that? Bernie wins. Mayor Pete couldn't win without that damn shadow app, could he, guys? Weigh in on the YouTube live stream chat and let us know your thoughts. All right, local news. Our Chicago mayor and Illinois governor are attending the same event today. They're both at the 78, the new South Loop mixed-use neighborhood. And we never talk about the 78, do we?
Oh, God. They're both there?
Yep.
I thought they would hide.
No, they're out.
They're out
Waving,
there.
Happy about it. Governor J.B. Pritzker is there to celebrate the Innovation Network and Discovery Partners Institute. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot is there to announce the anchor in the first phase of the $7 billion project. I don't have my computer with me, so I'll just go, yes, that's billion with a B.
I like when you do this without the computer.
I hate it. Your thoughts?
Well, the 78, of course, is the TIF deal that was in the shadows of the Lincoln Yard TIF deal. It was passed by the city council at its last meeting during Rahm's administration. Rahm was heading out the door, and as a gift to developers, he's got the city council to pass these two mega TIF deals. I think, I'll do this off the top of my head, I think the 78 is a $1.1 billion handout to developers. Now, this chunk of land in the 78, folks, you got to picture this. It's just south of Roosevelt Road, or roughly Clark Street, a huge swath of undeveloped land adjoining the Chicago River. Like there's dirt bikers out there, homeless people out there, people camp out there. I've wandered through a few times, a lot of reefer smokers out there back in the day, D, before it was legal. Probably still are a lot of reefer smokers out there.
Yeah, back in the day, 2 months ago?
Yeah.
Way back in the day.
Way back in the day. Did I tell you at the opera there was someone smoking reefer? Oh, yes, I did tell you that. Anyway, so it's a huge chunk of undeveloped land. I've written about it from time to time over the years. Tony Rezko, he went to the former Blagojevich aide who went to prison for some corruption charges. Once owned the land, was looking for TIF assistance to develop it. That's why I call it Rezko Field. All right, it's interesting nobody else calls it Rezko Field among the powers that be. Did they say in the press release whether anybody's calling it Rezko Field?
Let me look. No.
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 You know, No love for Tony Rezko, okay? No love for that great tradition of corruption. Here you go. Here I am talking about corruption among Democrats. Remember I said that at the outset? I'm always talking about corruption among Democrats. Just waiting for a Republican to talk about some corruption among Republicans. Remember I said, D, that's it. It's over. I'm not going to talk about Democratic corruption anymore. Only going to talk about Donald Trump until the Tribune starts talking about Donald Trump corruption. Here I am, man. Some habits are hard to break. Anyway, you talk about bad deals. Yeah, so anyway, they've given them $1.1 billion. They're going to develop it. They're going to say it's going to drive up the cost of living in Chicago. It's going to fuel the fires of gentrification. It's going to make it that much more expensive to live on the near south sides of Chicago. And they're going to call it progress. And in some ways, it will be progress. But in other ways, it'll dramatically affect people's lives. People will have to move out of the city, move out of their neighborhoods, and it'll force our property taxes to go up. That will do two things: force more people out of their house and make me broker than I already am. So Pritzker and Lori Lightfoot, I know, are saying this is a wonderful deal for the city of Chicago. This is a great deal for the taxpayers of Chicago. But, you know, I'm not so certain that it's a wonderful deal. I'm sure there are many other ways. I'd rather have that $1.1 billion spent. But I'm just one vote, D. I don't determine how the city spends its money. And again, that was passed by the city council in the waning days of the Rahm Emanuel administration, the last city council meeting. And I just want to point out Byron Sixto Lopez, who's now the alderman of the 25th Ward, opposed it. And but he had not taken office yet. And so I remember the great philosophers who explain aldermanic prerogative. Remember that? I mean, I think Mr. Bike might have been explaining this to us at one point. Mm-hmm. Aldermanic prerogative does not exist unless that alderman's been sworn in. Oh, I thought it was this great crime, this shocking abuse of power. The alderman, Sixto Lopez, was protesting in the streets of Chicago against this TIF. He's saying, the voters of the 25th Ward elected me as their alderman. I'm against this TIF, and it's in my ward. They approved it anyway. And then the justification was, well, he hadn't been sworn in. The incumbent alderman, or the previous alderman, was a guy named Danny Solis, who we don't even know where he is. He went into hiding after it was revealed that he was wearing a wiretap. He was he's wearing a wire, excuse me. He was taping conversations with Ed Burke. Somehow or other, Danny Solis, had more clout with the city council than Byron Sixto Lopez. So I kind of welcome the 78 on the regards that it just shows what a non-issue aldermanic prerogative is. It exists when you want to blame the alderman for something, and then it doesn't exist when the mayor wants something that the local alderman doesn't want.
So you don't want to hang out at the 78 with me this weekend?
Well, yeah, we could walk around right now.
Sack?
We could, just walk through the woods. You should check it out, man.
Okay.
You would like it.
All right.
Hang out with the hipsters and the guys on their dirt bikes and stuff like that. Yeah, that's who uses it now. It's going to be in about 5-10 years, that'll be a whole different ballgame.
Hey, a bipartisan poll was recently conducted and released. It was a poll or survey focusing on us crazy Illinoisans. This poll was conducted November 13th through the 21st by Normington Pets and We Ask America. 1,000 Illinoisans were polled, and two important issues were covered: public schools and corruption.
Mm-hmm. What they find.
Well, here's a quote from Jill Normington of Normington Pets. Quote, "This poll is the only bipartisan look at the state of public schools in Illinois. We sampled people from all across the state and from many different communities." And here's a quote from We Ask America's Andrew Weissert. Quote, "We work collaboratively to make sure this poll was done without bias so we could truly get an honest look at the state of education in the state of Illinois." So now that you know what the hell we're talking about here, let's look at the numbers. Shout out to Illinois State Journal Register and Capital Fax's Rich Miller, the meanest Illinois political bulldog in the yard, for the data. The first question on the poll: out of 1,000 Illinoisans polled, would you say things in Illinois today are generally headed in the right direction, or would you say things are off on the wrong track? Before we find the results, Ben, what do you think? Right direction or wrong track?
Personally,
you,
right now?
Ben.
Right direction.
Ben says right direction. The results: right direction, 29%.
All right, I'm writing this down.
Wrong track, 57%.
And then
Leaving 14%. I don't know. Don't know. Huh? I gotta go.
I don't know.
Can I call you back?
What about you, man? What do you say? Wrong track, right direction.
I'd say right direction.
Yeah, come on, we just legalized reefer, everybody.
And the guy who did absolutely nothing for 4 years, Bruce Rauner. I mean, we're doing something. So I guess, we're on the right track.
Man, I'll tell you what, Illinois is a hard crowd to please, Wrong direction, wrong tracks. Wrong tracks. They're developing the 78. Aren't you happy? Come on. Be happy, Illinois.
All right, now let's talk public schools and teacher pensions.
Oh, boy.
Here's the poll question.
Uh-huh.
As you may know, teachers in Illinois do not pay into and therefore do not collect Social Security when they retire.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Illinois teachers should receive their full pension, see their pensions cut some, or see their pensions eliminated?
All right, this poll, there's an underlying reason for this poll. There's a subterranean political purpose for this poll. I knew nothing about this by no pre-show planning on the Ben Joravsky show, all right? I came dashing in with a bagel for D. I didn't know. Forgot to ask him what stories he had for me. I'm hearing this when you're hearing this.
We're not bragging.
I'm telling you, there's a subterranean reason. As soon as we got to, where's Jeff Johnson when I need him for an explanation of pensions?
So, full pension,
up to nothing.
Cut some, or eliminated. Ben, what are you going for?
So the question is, do I believe that we should honor teachers' pensions?
Do you think that Illinois teachers should receive their full pension, see their pension cut some, or see their pensions eliminated?
Full pensions, underlined, and I want one too. So,
all right,
full pension, yes.
And cut some, 11%. Eliminated, 6%.
Wow.
Full pension, 75%.
Dang.
Leaving 9%. I don't know. What is full who? Full house?
Way to take a stand, everybody. Whoa.
Ben, you seem surprised by that result.
I am surprised by that result. I am. So now I'm starting to figure out who put this poll out there. I am surprised. I'm always surprised when I'm with the majority of the people on any poll. Usually on the wrong side of the voters of Chicago. Although in this last mayoral election, D, let me just point out to you. All right? Let me just point something out to you.
Point it out.
All right? I'm going to point it out to you right now.
Please do. Oh, wait, are you about to point something out?
Yeah. I was on the winning side for once in my life. I voted for Lori Lightfoot. Guess who won? Lori Lightfoot. So for once, I was with the majority. That's unbelievable. When it was all over, the rest of the people were going, huh? What happened?
Well, I wonder if she thinks you're a winner now.
Oh, come on, Lori loves me. You know that.
Next poll question.
Oh, here's another one. I love this poll.
Right now, teachers hired after the year 2011 in Illinois must work in a classroom until age 67 in order to be eligible to receive their pensions, no matter how many years they have been teaching.
Okay.
The question, do you strongly oppose, somewhat support, or strongly support recently hired teachers being able to receive their pensions at age 60 instead of waiting until 67?
I'm going with no. I think you should wait till you're 67.
So you...
What's that?
You somewhat oppose?
Yeah. You wait. Same rules, man. Why are you changing the rules in the middle of stuff?
Here's the results.
Wait. So I oppose. Now that dyslexia is kicking in, D. Do I oppose this thing, or am I for? Could you imagine a pollster calling me? I'd be like, all right, hold on now.
I'm trying to imagine doing a podcast about the damn thing.
Folks, this is me on the ACT, okay? Can I tell you right now? In fact, let me just share this. I had to fill out a form for my Oscar predictions on Sunday, one of those betting things. And it was online. There were all these categories. And I just had this flashback to the ACT. I started panicking. I broke into a sweat. I'm like, can I just, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to start guessing. And then I ended up losing on the poll thing. So anyway, I'm saying keep it at 67.
All right, once again, do you strongly oppose, somewhat support, or strongly support recently hired teachers being able to receive their pensions at age 60 instead of waiting until 67? Strongly oppose, 19%.
All right, strong.
Somewhat oppose, 14%. Somewhat support, 24%.
Ooh.
Strongly support, 38.
Wow. I bet a lot of young people fill that out. They want to retire early.
With a total oppose of 32% and a total support of 62%, leaving 6% going, what the hell are you talking about? I don't know.
What? And there's another question. How many understood the question? 99% did not. That's the most confusing question I ever heard.
Oh, it gets worse.
Oh, no. Wait a minute. This poll, most people are just saying, I don't know. Pick one for me. Take one off the...
Yes, seriously, up next, some poll results that will more than likely confuse every single one of us listening. Here we go.
Oh, man.
Respondents were then asked to rate how important each one of these priorities was to them on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
with 10 being the most important. Here are the percentages of those who rated them a 10, followed by the percentages of those who rated them 8, 9, or 10.
Can I raise the white flag? This is like.
I don't wanna
Did
do
you ever
this
see? There was a Steve Martin movie. Wait, were you a Steve Martin fan?
Absolutely.
I think I may have been the jerk. I can't remember. He gets pulled over for a suspicion of drunk driving, and the police officer makes him go through this increasingly more and more difficult test to see if he's drunk. In the end, he's like hopping on one foot and juggling. You know what I mean? He goes, "Boy, you have some hard drunk driving tests." That's what this is like. I don't know. Whoever wrote this poll, let's get Dan Cohen in here.
We'll save everybody the worries here. We'll just read the top two here. It says having high quality public schools came in at 59%, and cleaning up corruption in state government 69%. So those were the two things that Illinoisans were really
more people are concerned about corruption in Illinois than there are about public schools. Yep. I would say the two are linked. If you have a electorate that's a bunch of dummies, it's easier to be corrupt. How about that as a theory, huh? Let's get a poll on that. Why would I? I'm trying to think like, give it a. You think it's harder to pick a top three in the Democratic nomination? I'm supposed to figure out which one is more important, not having corrupt politicians or having good schools? I don't know, D. That's a tough one. Can I just say to the pollster, that's a tough question. Or I don't like the question. Is there a category for I don't like the question?
Well, I don't know. There's that one.
That's different than I don't know. I think there's something wrong with that question.
All right. Well, that was confusing, wasn't it, everybody?
I mean, it's not like you have to choose one or the other. You can have both, right? You can have corruption-free government and good schools. Just saying.
All right, and finally, we got one more story here. This is not about surveys or polls, so your brain can relax, everybody.
I'm going to take a drink.
The following comes from the Chicago Sun-Times and Mitchell Armentrout, and it's definitely rich in more ways than one. Whoa. Denied a bid to open a suburban racetrack casino and fighting state regulators' effort to revoke his video gambling license, suburban developer Rick Heidner says that an Illinois Gaming Board employee leaked mountains of his sensitive information to 3 federal agencies in a data breach revealed last month. Now, Hyder and his company, Gold Rush Amusements, are taking the Gaming Board to court with a $4 million lawsuit filed Tuesday, claiming that the unnamed employee served up personal and financial information intentionally and illegally, and that the board only made things worse for Heidner with, quote, unfair and improper actions that hit his reputation and bottom line in the fallout of his failed Tinley Park Racino deal. Citing state privacy laws, Gaming Board Administrator Marcus Fruchter noticed state legislative leaders of the data breach in a January 10th letter saying that they discovered a week earlier that an IGB employee may have improperly accessed confidential information on IGB licenses and applicants and disclosed this information without authorization or justification to 3 federal government entities.
Hey, Monroe Anderson is here.
Hey.
That enables me to avoid having to say anything about that story because I don't really know much about it.
We'll be right back, everybody. Monroe Anderson coming up. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show, live from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Monroe Anderson in the studio. It is Trump time. Time to talk about Trump. A lot to talk about Trump. Dan Cohen on his way, political pollster. Since the word got out, Monroe, that Dan Cohen is coming to the show today, I've been getting texts from all kinds of people. Joanne, I saw your text. Carlos, I saw your text. What a great guy Dan Cohen is. How smart he is. So, like, the expectation is sky high on this guy.
Okay, yeah.
So Dan Cohen on his way.
Yeah, see, whereas with me, they go, oh, it's only Monroe.
It's Monroe again. No, they didn't say anything. See, now you took glass half full and turned it into glass half empty.
Right.
Cohen is on his way. It's the first time he's a rookie on our show. Let's hope he can figure out how to get here. But anyway, Dan Cohen is on his way. We'll probably hold off. A lot of political news, the New Hampshire primary, the state of the Democratic Party, Bloomberg versus Bernie. I have a feeling that's coming up. I have a feeling, to quote the Beatles, that's coming up. Joe Biden, what's the state of his candidacy? Top three. I may ask Monroe his top three candidates. I've already given my top three. Dennis ducked it when I asked him, and so we'll see if Monroe ducks it as well. Every week that he comes on the show, or most every week, Monroe writes a little something that's usually pretty funny on his Facebook page, sort of sums up what's on his mind. I'm going to share with folks what you wrote this time. All right, Monroe?
All right.
So this, and then I'm going to spare folks the responses. Monroe Anderson, for a lefty, and he's generally a lefty, whether he admits it or not, has so many right-wing Facebook friends, like all these MAGA hat wearers out there. They love jousting with Monroe, and it is pretty funny. But anyway.
And I troll them back.
Yes, you troll them back. And back in the old days when we took phone calls on the old show, they would call in, and then they got so tired of getting whooped, they wouldn't call in anymore. Come on, we're only the one guy. What was his name? James always would call in.
Yeah, no, he's on my Facebook.
He's
page
Facebook.
now. Yeah.
All right, here we go. Is Chuck Schumer right in asking the Inspector General to look into Bill Barr's decision to ask the judge to reduce Roger Stone's sentence? That's the question, to which I say, yes. Okay, that's just me answering it. Do you think that America's most lawless president ever had a hand in this? Yes. Yes, he did. Okay? Yes, he did. I know, like we all know, that Kim Foxx made a phone call to Eddie Johnson on behalf of Jussie Smollett. We all know that. I want to know what phone calls Donnie Trump made, huh? You know, if it's worth investigating here in Cook County, right? Monroe, I'm just saying. Monroe, I'm going to hold him accountable for the Tribune. Many years ago, he worked at the poor guy.
Yeah, many, many years ago.
All right. The statute of limitation has expired.
Yes.
All right, here, what else? Should Barr be investigated and impeached? Yes.
And I forgot to put, and Trump should be impeached again.
Yeah, again. By the way, there is no double jeopardy
Right,
on
no,
impeachment.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, I learned that. Jim Coogan told me that. All right. What about Trump's revenge attack and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother? It's an outrage. What about it? It's an outrage. But I'm going to ask Monroe about that. I'm going to actually play devil's advocate with Monroe on that one. And then, of course, he just goes on to...
I ask rhetorical questions.
Yeah. Here's the closing line. He's talking about where you can watch the Ben Joravsky Show. You can watch us on YouTube or download us wherever you get your podcasts at Fox News. Would you put the Fox News thing in there just to inflame your right-wing followers?
No, the story I have underneath it is from Fox News.
I get it.
And so that's their logo.
I see. Oh, you give us. I'm like, what is it? At Fox News. Oh, the story says Chuck Schumer asked for IG investigation into DOJ decision. All right, a lot to unpack there. The IG Roger Stone was was convicted. We were waiting for the sentencing recommendations. Justice Department lawyers are always making sentencing recommendations,
and there are guidelines for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't just pull them out of their
out of the air
or something like that. Right, there are guidelines, and so the guidelines they came up with the 7 to 9 years.
The actual prosecutors who prosecuted the case, yes.
Which is a little on the tough side, but you have to factor in that he taunted him.
He being Roger Stone.
Yeah, Stone.
As opposed to Donald Trump, who also taunted.
Yeah, right, exactly. He taunted him. Mm-hmm. He basically pulled a Blago on him.
throughout the whole thing, he was pulling a Blago on him.
Exactly.
And Blago got 14 years
for doing that.
Yeah.
And Trump, who was threatened to let Blago loose, too, says about Stone's sentencing, possible sentencing, it's much too harsh. In fact, he shouldn't have been investigated again at all because Trump is innocent. He didn't do anything. He's perfect.
Yeah. I would never use the word innocent in relation to anyone named Trump, okay?
Well, but he tells you that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he doesn't say he's innocent. He says he's perfect.
Yeah, he's perfect.
He might not use innocent.
No, I don't think he would use the word innocent.
Yeah, because lightning would come out of the sky. He doesn't believe in God, but it come down and smite him.
All right. So do you think that Donald Trump got on the phone and put pressure on Justice Department officials? Or do you think he even had to? Do you
he
think
didn't
Barr
have
just...
to. No, because he tweeted and he announced that it was too harsh. The sentence was too harsh. And them being good soldiers, they said, yes, sir, Mr. Trump.
That's right. Let's think about that. I began the show by talking about Justice Smollett and how outraged so many people in the city of Chicago, particularly your old employer, the Chicago Tribune, they're really outraged.
Oh, the Tribune will be the Tribune.
Yeah, the Tribune. No matter what happens, the Tribune is still the Tribune.
Right,
they're always outraged when Democrats are up to no good.
Or liberals.
Liberals, yeah. And but anyway, they're outraged. They're really outraged at Kim Foxx because Justice Smollett, she apparently intervened on behalf of Justice Smollett, but not one word about this. But yeah, it's clearly, you don't even have to investigate it. He did. He tweeted it out.
Right.
Donald Trump tweeted out his opinions on this matter.
Right. Exactly. Which, in Trump world, this could happen. If Stone, after Stone is sentenced, he could say that his lawyers could argue that he should be released because of the president prejudiced the sentencing.
Wow.
Yeah, because the president of the United States has no business putting his opinion in it at all. So, at a good defense attorney could go, well, they gave him 3 years, and he would have gotten away with 0 or 6 months or something. But the president got involved in the case.
That's like the standard definition of chutzpah. The standard definition of chutzpah is a person who kills his parents and then pleads for mercy to the judge on the grounds that he's an orphan.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
That is the standard definition of it. And that if that defense attorney were saying, you know what? How can you sentence this guy? The president intervened, and it just prejudices everybody.
Right.
Let him go.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
Right. And then Trump wouldn't have to pardon him, which is not off the table.
It's not off the table. But you think Trump cares about? See, this is where Blagojevich is connected to all this stuff.
Right.
Because we've had Leonard Goodman on the show many times. He is Rod Blagojevich's attorney, and he's trying to get Rod Blagojevich out of federal prison. And I'll say what I always say. I believe Blagojevich, the sentencing was far too harsh.
Me too.
14 years is ridiculous.
Right.
That said, their last hope is for Donald Trump to commute the sentence or pardon him, et cetera, let him out.
Right.
And I think that Donald Trump would only do that in correlation and connection with a pardoning of somebody who's going to jail for a crime connected to him.
Right.
Then he has cover for it.
Exactly.
Then, you know what I'm saying?
No, and he probably will do that because what he's doing now is setting up to pardon Flynn.
Oh, explain that one. Michael Flynn. I hadn't thought about Michael Flynn in a while.
Right, no.
The former, his chief foreign affairs advisor.
Yeah.
Who lasted.
National security.
National security. But how many weeks did he last before he had to leave?
I'm trying to remember.
It was very fast, Monroe. I don't think it was a month.
Yeah, right. It was very fast because he was hanging out with the
Russians.
With the Russians and the Ukrainians and.
So you think that it'll be Flynn that gets pardoned first, not Roger Stone?
Yeah.
So you would be Flynn
because Flynn is set up for it. I mean, Trump has been preparing us for this. I mean, Flynn was singing like a canary, and then somebody got to him. He fired his defense team, got these new lawyers in, and he shut up. All of a sudden, he
Stopped
had nothing
cooperating.
else. Yeah, stopped cooperating. And the speculation, very strong speculation, is that he's cut a deal with Trump to get pardoned. And so that's why he stopped talking or singing.
Do you believe that?
Yes. Anything that's corrupt and dishonest and cheating that pops up about Trump, I believe.
Yeah. All right, so let's take this back. Chuck Schumer's asked for an investigation. Last week, we had an impeachment inquiry end up in acquittal.
Yes.
And all along,
Yeah, in acquittal in what could not really be called a trial, since there were no witnesses. And no evidence brought
absolutely.
forth. And so that's not a trial by anybody's unless it's in Russia or someplace like that.
And so the fact is that it was Donald Trump who blocked any witnesses from testifying, who ordered his aides not to turn over materials. That matter was not adjudicated before the trial, before the impeachment trial. In other words, the Democrats didn't take it to court to try to force Donald Trump.
Well, they took some things to court, but then they realized that what he was doing is which is an old tactic of Trump's, is that he goes to court and he strings it out so long, and let's say you were a carpenter on one of his buildings, that he would take it to court and it would cost you so much money and it would take so long through the course that finally you just say, screw it. He can have the money. I just want to, I want out of here. And so that's what he was doing. He's using that same tactic.
Fair enough.
For his investigations.
And I subscribe to the notions that the Democrats should have followed it. Should have said, all right, that's the game you're playing. We're going to play the game too.
Right.
And my belief was that the Democrats should have just forced the decision. Let it go to court. Let's see what the judges rule. Let's go all the way to the Supreme Court. Get Kavanaugh and Gorsuch to rule so we could show how corrupt this system is.
Right.
All right. And
well, they still can do that. I have some cases in there, so they still can do that. But I mean, this is a 3-level chess game that's going on here. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on, and Trump will go down, but it could be in 3 months, it could be in 2 years. But he will go down.
Monroe has been making this prediction since
Yeah, right. No,
Inauguration Day.
Yeah, right. No. The thing is, he's not going to get reelected. And when he is no longer in office, and they may have to drag him out kicking and screaming like Omarosa left the White House.
Yeah.
He may go the same way. But after that, then there are these sealed indictments. Mm-hmm. And he's also individual number one in New York in the case that sent Michael Cohen to jail. So I mean, it's all kind of things that's going on. We have one of the sexual harassment, rape charges that's in the courts.
Yeah.
We have his money. I mean, it's so many things going on. Trump will go to his grave with litigation and court cases still.
Well,
unless he lives to be 100.
Yeah. And by the way, last week, when you were, I'm listening to your predictions.
Yes.
It's so interesting because last week, and I know you're not afraid to swim against the tide of prevailing opinions. I'm going to start by saying that.
Exactly.
And you're not afraid to be a contrarian.
As Trump said about us black folks, what do I have to lose?
Right. What do you have to lose? That I went on a rant yesterday. I can't remember what set me off. You just reminded me of that. It is Donald Trump's. What set me off was this. We probably should hold off to talk about this with young Dan Cohen. But Donald Trump's reaching out to Bernie supporters, of which I am one, reminds me of Donald Trump reaching out to black voters. Follow me, of which you are one. All right? Follow me on this. He offers nothing in the way of substance to a black voter or a Bernie supporter
Well,
to warrant his vote?
Yeah, well,
Nothing.
He did that prisoner thing that the black woman in the commercial was so grateful about.
Okay, he took care of that
Yeah,
one
right,
lady.
Exactly. No, there are other people who have bum raps. I mean, it's some new law or something which I didn't pay any attention to, mainly because
Is that it?
I
Is that
think
enough?
if
Is that
he
it?
was seriously interested in black folks, he would reward those who are not in jail.
Yeah.
He just do something for the hardworking black people who have been discriminated against.
Today's paper is filled with stories about cases here in Cook County in Chicago that had to be thrown out
Right.
because of abusive tactics by the police officers. Right?
Exactly.
Where has Donald Trump been on any of that?
Yeah.
Where's Donald Trump on stop and frisk?
Well, he said don't be gentle with them, rough them up.
Rough them up.
remember?
Okay, so I'll go back to what I said.
Yeah.
He's offered nothing to black people. Just vote for me. He offers nothing to Bernie people. If you look at a Bernie person, what people want, like national health care, college for all, for public institutions. These just the help with the crushing debt of college loans. So these are like Bernie's main. He offers nothing.
Right.
Some kind of dealing with the global climate change. Nothing. He offers nothing. But just vote for me.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? It's like the chutzpah of the guy is unbelievable.
Well, except has he really gone after any Bernie?
We'll talk about this again when young Dan is in here,
Yeah.
but he is clearly attempting to drive a wedge between Bernie Sanders voters and the centrist wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
okay,
that's-
he's trying
yeah,
to
that's
drive a wedge.
different.
So whenever there's any opportunity to exploit the feeling that Bernie Sanders supporters have that the system's rigged, he goes, the system's rigged against Bernie.
But that's part of they want to run against Bernie because they think he'll be easy to.
We'll hold that off for when Dan Cohen is here. But yeah, but
okay, just this one little thing. So they've been encouraging Republicans in South Carolina to take a Democratic ballot and vote a Democratic, declare themselves
declared Democrat,
yeah, and vote for Bernie. So, but the rest we could take up.
No, we'll take up with them.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask Dan Cohen that.
Yeah.
That's. I agree with you on that point. I've said this for a while. I believe that the conventional wisdom in this country is that Bernie Sanders is the easier candidate for
Right.
Donald Trump to beat,
Right.
and the conventional wisdom is the wisdom that guides the pollsters and the strategists in both parties,
Yeah.
not just the Democratic Party,
Right.
but the Republican Party as well.
Right.
So whenever Donald Trump, whenever I read, whenever I read any Republican right winger sobbing crocodile tears for Bernie Sanders supporters, I'm like, oh. You're right. They just want Bernie.
Right, exactly. They
'cause
want Bernie.
They buy into the conventional wisdom.
Right. Of course, there's one problem with that.
What's that?
We, meaning Democrats, bought into the Trump theory in 2016. Figured he'd be the easiest one to beat of the 19. And it didn't work out.
Yeah, it didn't
that
work
way.
out. Yeah, no, I've never bought into the conventional wisdom of Bernie Sanders is so easy to defeat. I think you're absolutely correct. Your main point that's embedded in what you said is Bernie Sanders is an unconventional candidate. Hence, the conventional wisdom is that he'd be easy to beat. And you're right. Donald Trump sort of charted a new course in 2016.
And some of, I think it was 20%. Your next guest will be able to help me on that, but I think 20% of those who were with Bernie went for Trump because they just wanted change. They wanted
I heard it
radical
was
change.
10%.
Okay.
I always heard it was 10%, which I always point this out because we are constantly relitigating the 2016 election in this studio. And I pride myself in the fact that on our show, I've got a lot of Bernie supporters, and I bring in mainstream Democrats as well.
Yeah.
And the mainstream Democrats are still upset because they think Bernie sold them out. I defend Bernie on this point. Dan Cohen has entered the studio. Dan Cohen has entered the studio. Pollster has entered the studio. We're going to bring him on really soon. And I defend Bernie on this one because I think Bernie Sanders actually went to work for Hillary Clinton in October. For some reason, that gets forgotten by Hillary supporters. And they always forget that Bernie was on the trail in Iowa, North Carolina, etc., for Hillary Clinton in October 2016. So it was 10%, and I believe it was a higher number. Dan Cohen probably knows this. It was a higher number of Hillary Clinton supporters in 2008 that voted for John McCain than Bernie Sanders supporters in 2016 voted for Donald Trump.
See, the problem is with the hardcore Hillary backers, they have PTSD, and it carried over. And Hillary still has it because she should be quiet right now. She should not be offering comment. But I could understand every time Trump does something stupid or evil or
Which
illegal,
is every day.
Right, exactly. She's banging her head up against the wall, thinking it should have been me. It should have been me. It should have been
Bernie's fault.
Right, exactly. It's somebody's fault. Not that the Russians. Well, it is a lot of people's fault.
All right, let's
Yeah, you and I don't agree on this.
No, actually, we kind of agree on this.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this because Dan Cohen can hear this, and we'll see if he agrees with this. A lot of this, the wedge between Hillary and Bernie was that divide owes itself to the infiltration of Democratic computers by hackers or the Russians who took the emails they found with all the incriminating evidence that showed a bias against Bernie, that showed hostility, which we all knew existed on the part of mainstream Democrats to lefties like me, and exposed it. All right, so the whole world, and they did this at the very precise moment that the Democrats were convening in Philadelphia, I believe it was in Philadelphia, to nominate Hillary Clinton.
It was all timed. I mean,
it was timed.
Because the Russians had the information, so they would feed the Trump campaign information critical to whatever state they were going after at the time, campaigning in.
But could you imagine we saw all the mean, nasty things that Hillary Clinton supporters were saying about Bernie Sanders. All right, and I say this all the time. We didn't see all the mean, nasty things that Bernie Sanders supporters were saying about Hillary Clinton, and I know those emails exist because it was a contentious primary.
Right.
And everybody wanted their candidate to win. Right. And you know what it's like when you get into politics. You end up hating the other side. And it's short term. Like
it should be.
It should be. Well, I notice in Chicago, like I'll get people call me up. Let's say I'm just making this up. Okay. They're working for Kim Fox. Yeah. So they'll call me up and totally trash Bob Fioretti. I'm just making this. This has not literally happened, but they'll trash him. Yeah. They'll trash the people that work for Bob Fioretti. They'll say they're no good, this, that, and the other thing. And then 3 months later, guess what? That same person that called me to trash Bob Fioretti is working in alliance with the person he was trashing before. That's primary politics, Monroe.
Yes.
You know how the game is played.
Right.
You lived through it. This is ancient history. In '89, Black community still has not completely. Well, I guess it has recovered. It is ancient history.
Maybe not. Maybe. No, there's some people who I
Sawyer
occasionally run into.
They're still mad about that.
Right.
You remember how Evans people trashed Gene Sawyer?
Yes.
They were both mainstream Democratic politicians, Monroe. Right. But somehow or other, when the Evans people got done talking about Sawyer, Evans was like Saint Tim Evans and Sawyer, right?
Exactly.
You lived through that.
Oh, yeah.
So this is, to me, it's like the similar fact. It's a similar game with Sanders and Hillary Clinton. You know what I'm saying? And the Russians exposed it all.
And what that tends to do is keep the party divided, and therefore it's incapable of winning an election.
Well,
that's why it took blacks in Chicago 30 years to get a new black mayor, another black mayor.
Isn't that right?
Yes.
30 years of Daley and Rahm.
Right.
And they ran how many black people out of the city of Chicago?
Right, exactly. 100,000 at least.
Man, I can't believe I lived through all this stuff. All right, before we bring Dan Cohen on and take a deep dive into all the political news of the day and his thoughts on the New Hampshire primary, the state of the Democratic Party, Bernie, Klobuchar, Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren. What's that guy's name? Oh, yeah, Mayor Pete. How could I forget him? Before we do all that, I got to ask you, does Donald John Trump have the right to fire Vindman, okay? Because, he gets to name his staff. Right. It's like what in Chicago we call it Shackman exempt position.
Well,
Yes or no? Does he have the right to fire him?
To remove him from the White House, yes, he has that right.
Yes.
But what he's trying to do now is get the Army to fire him, to run him out completely.
Okay, I think that's overstepping.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, the thing is, and we can talk after the break, but Trump has overreached. He will continue to overreach, and this is why he's going to get the living daylights beat out of him in November.
All right, Dan Cohen, you heard that. Monroe Anderson has not wavered on that prediction. He doesn't even know who the Democrats will nominate. He's saying the Democratic nominee will defeat Donald John Trump in November. We're going to bring Pollster Dan Cohen on, get his thoughts on this and many other topics when we return.
Hour number 2 of your Ben Joravsky Show is just moments away. But before we get into that, we got to thank the following unions again for jumping on board and sponsoring this program. Unions like the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 126 in District 8. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9 are sponsors of this program, as well as the Illinois Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. The International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, actually. Big thank you to those unions for jumping on board and sponsoring this show. And, of course, today's Ben Joravsky Show for Wednesday, February 12th, hour number 2, is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor. Cue the temporary dramatic intro. It is Wednesday, February 12th. And live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is the Ben Joravsky Show. In this hour of the program, we still got Monroe Anderson in studio, and we welcome Pollster Dan Cohen.
Yeah.
And now your host, can you feel the tension? Chicago Reader columnist Ben Joravsky.
Yes, listeners, I know I shouldn't break the wall, but I left. It's my fault. I left his computer at my house, so all that great music that he usually plays, we don't have.
It's just got one
He's
song,
got
and it's
one
this.
song, and the alternatives have Monroe sing his favorite Stevie Wonder songs, and I'm the only one who wants him to do that, so we're just going with the. By the way, Jeanette Taylor on the show, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor Monroe, she was on the show Friday. She sang live in front of that microphone where young Dan Cohen is sitting right now, a Stevie Wonder song. How about that? So are you ready to step up and sing a song?
No.
Okay. All right. Dan Cohen joins us, the discussion. Dan Cohen is a pollster, and you're a very popular guy, Dan. I've been getting texts from various people that say, you got Dan Cohen coming on this show? All right. And Joanna, shout out to you, and Carlos, shout out to you, both texting me. So before we take the deep dive and talk about all the political issues today, New Hampshire, Iowa, Amy Klobuchar, Mayor Pete, Mayor Bloomberg, Joe Biden's black voters, where they go, all those issues that are Democrats are facing right now. Tell folks a little bit about yourself. Who have you polled for? And generally, what your background in politics is.
Yeah, so I have, for the last 20 years, starting in Massachusetts, and the last 10 years been back and forth between Massachusetts and the Chicago area. Polling for a lot of aldermanic, state legislative races, again, mostly in the Northeast and in Chicago. And mostly down ballot legislative. Once in a while, the congressional or statewide, or the countywide.
I got you. So mostly you're Democrat.
Yes.
Okay, you work for the Democrats. Before we end this conversation, I'm going to trot out my theory about voters lying to pollsters. I'm not going to do it now. Just try to make sure I don't forget this. My position on pollsters when it comes to Donald Trump, I've said this to Monroe many times. White voters lie to pollsters when they say they aren't going to vote for him because they're embarrassed to admit that they're voting for him. And then black voters, particularly black men, lie to pollsters when they say they are going to vote for him. Not quite sure what psychological games are going on there. I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm not a psychiatrist, but that's my opinion. So that you always, in my opinion, you have an inflated number of black people who claim that they're voting for Donald John Trump, which is not borne out by anything, any actual vote tallies. And then you have a deflated, is that the right word? Whatever, number of white voters who are claiming they're going to vote for Donald Trump. And lo and behold, on election day, there's this shock. Oh my God, I thought they were going to vote for him. So that's my position. I'll get you warmed up a little bit before I get you to address on that one, the lying that goes on to pollsters and how pollsters deal with that. Let's start with New Hampshire. General thoughts on New Hampshire. Bernie Sanders was victorious. Pete Buttigieg second. Amy Klobuchar third. What's your general thoughts about it? I
mean, I think that the consensus is right on this, that it's about Amy Klobuchar. She, days before, was polling in the mid-single digits and had a really strong third-place finish. The gap between her and then Warren and Biden down below was very substantial. She wasn't expected to be a top-tier candidate, and now she absolutely is.
And what fueled that spike?
The debate. I mean, there was so the thing about the electorate that is different from many electorates is it was incredibly fluid. There were a lot of people who like any number of candidates, and they just take their time. Some of them just make their final decision when they're, in the ballot box. So you had a whole bunch of people trying to figure out what was going on, and to assist them, you had a debate 3 days before the election. That is
Friday's debate.
Yeah, Friday's debate. And Klobuchar did something that she hadn't done before. Prior to that, I always felt that Klobuchar did the best job making the moderate case, but she never made the case for herself. And the way that she went over that hump to finally transform from just making the moderate case for November viability in particular, She made the case for herself by calling out Bernie Sanders in a way that most people were trying not to do so fundamentally. And she came out, and the question came up, if you guys remember, is anyone worried about having someone who calls himself a socialist?
Yes.
And
Democratic socialist, but
yeah,
whatever.
sure,
Okay,
no,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
And she raised her hand, and in particular, made the point that, and again, I mean, think of who her audience is. Her audience are moderates who aren't sure who can really carry that water to the finish line.
Yeah.
And she said, it's absurd that no one's bringing this up. Of course, it's a bad thing to do. I'm concerned. So she set herself as the person who, if you have concerns about the Democratic Socialist label, about Bernie Sanders for whatever reason, that she is the person who will be your champion. Prior to that, Buttigieg off of Iowa had been surging himself. He had kind of a rough debate, and one of the other things that happened that I think was a really smart move on Klobuchar's part, she attacked him for denigrating Washington, D.C. experience.
Yes.
And that spoke directly to, that hit him on a supposed strength. He was the person who valued everyone. And suddenly she called him out for being divisive and denigrating other people. And that's a tough thing. If you're surging on the idea that it's all about civility and, we all love each other and we're all going to be unified, then she's like, what are you talking about? You're denigrating the majority of the people on the stage. That's a really bad look. So she was able to get herself noticed as the counterpoint to Bernie Sanders and cut down the person who had been making those gains. And in doing so, she ensured that Bernie Sanders would come in first place. Because otherwise, Buttigieg was on the way to move above him.
So she took votes that would otherwise have gone to Buttigieg and enabled Bernie to win.
Yep.
So Bernie should be sending her flowers today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the ironies of these complicated fields that, from the Sanders perspective, he's benefiting from a lot of moderate candidates splitting the vote, so he gets to say, I am the front runner.
Right. If you add up her votes and Buttigieg and Biden, it's 60% or something like that.
So it's a centrist vote. All right, and Big Daddy centrist was not in the race, and that's Michael Bloomberg. We'll get to Big Daddy in a little while. All right, so are you saying, Dan Cohen, that there's an equivalency to what I was just explaining? And let me follow me in this, Monroe. This is going to go to you too. I just laid out my theory about white voters lying to pollsters about Donald Trump. They don't want to admit that they're going to vote for Trump, so they lie to pollsters. Not all of them, but some of them, enough to have these surprises when the final results are in. Are you saying there's something equivalent going in the Democratic in the Democratic primary, where voters are generally ashamed to admit they have a bias against a Democratic socialist, and so they mislead pollsters because they don't want to admit that, I'm troubled by the word socialism? Do you think that's going on?
I think that the polling has actually, I think the voters have done a perfectly good job explaining what their concern is, and very honestly, they are concerned about viability. And so you look at the Bernie Sanders platform. It's enormously popular among the Democratic primary electorate. And yet, I think it was 62% of people said it was more important for them to vote for who is viable. And so, pardon me, if you have the centrist candidates putting forth a narrative, and this is a pretty important dynamic with the whole field, we don't know which kind of candidate is the best one. There's competing theories, but the moderate candidates' theories that they're putting forward are resonating more. So you have people who feel very good about Bernie Sanders. You have people who feel very good about Elizabeth Warren, who, despite her poor finish, is still very popular among Democrats. But they are voting more for the people they feel will be more viable against Donald Trump.
Right. That's why the black vote is shifting to Bloomberg
From Biden.
From Biden.
Yep.
Okay, we'll get into the black vote. That's a fascinating, gets into the whole issue of whether Bernie is too to the left for black voters, a theory that has been established by many people in the show, including David Seaton. I disagree with that theory, but we'll get into that one. I have to ask you a question about the competing theories. All right. The competing theories that you just laid out. One, Bernie's too lefty. He can't win. But two, the competing theory put out by the Bernie people is that mainstream Democrats have lost their allure to voters in the age of Trump, and that if you want to win, you have to have a candidate with a resounding populist appeal like Bernie to get new voters to come to the polls, to get new voters to register and show up. Those are two competing theories about electability. What's your position on that, Dan Cohen?
I don't think that either one of those theories it really captures the complicated dynamics of that kind of race. I think that they might work as campaign tactics. If you have to convince your base not to abandon you because they're concerned about viability, you give them a simple theory of whatever sort, and they go, oh yeah, okay, cool. But in terms of the different dynamics that actually happen, first of all, there's not just an ideological spectrum. There's all kinds of things that people consider. Do they feel that they trust the person or not? There's a spectrum about that. We tend not to vote for people who would be normally considered Washington, D.C. insiders. We have a whole modern history. The less D.C. person wins pretty much every presidential November election. So we have to look beyond just that ideological spectrum and be willing to think about more complicated dynamics in place to tackle that. Now, that's something that might not make very sexy rhetoric for a candidate on the campaign trail, except if 62% of the primary voters are saying, but that's my number one concern, then we have to have a more sophisticated conversation about it.
Less D.C. voter. I hadn't thought about that. I cannot remember the last D.C. centered candidate who was elected president.
George Bush against Mike Dukakis. That's the exception.
Very good.
That's correct.
I was actually going to go back in time. Let's see. I was going to go back in time to Lyndon Baines Johnson. I was thinking 1964 against Barry Goldwater. But you're right. George Bush was a creature.
He had the best resume in Washington.
He had the best resume in Washington. And Dukakis was a governor. We had Delmarie Cobb in the studio last week. Monroe, you'll get a kick out of this one. And Delmarie Cobb is a political strategist here in the city of Chicago. Dan Cohen, been around, knows the game. And she was Jesse Jackson's press secretary back in 1988. And she told a story about how in 1988, she was trying to contrast, she's a big Hillary fan, Dan. She was trying to contrast Jesse's attitude toward the nominee and Bernie Sanders. She said that in 88, that Jesse Jackson's supporters were begging him to stay in the race and not to endorse Dukakis and to try to force Dukakis to be the vice president, to name him as VP, and that Jesse backed off and supported Dukakis without the guarantee that they'd be a VP. And then she said, in her humble opinion, had Dukakis selected as Jesse Louis Jackson as his running mate, he would have been victorious. What do you think of that, Monroe? Do you think he would have been victorious?
No.
Dan, you weren't even around. You're too young. But what do you think about that?
There are Jesse haters out there today. He hasn't even been that active.
Yeah.
And there are people who feel about Jesse like many of us feel about Trump. And so no.
Yeah.
So I was around. That was the first presidential election that I voted in.
Okay.
I don't remember off the top of my head what the African American turnout was relative to other races at that point. I mean, I think that certainly, that race stands out to me because you had someone who normally is the kind of candidate who does well against DC establishment folks, but it didn't happen, and it's uniquely the exception over many, many decades. I think that even at that time, though, you had far fewer mediums through which people receive their election information. It was much easier for the political operatives to have very standard models that change very little. So even using that to think about how to approach this election, I don't think is helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing is Jesse would have overshadowed Dukakis big time
Oh my goodness.
as a personality. And he would have upstaged him because
Yeah.
that's Jesse's nature.
No.
He can't help himself.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think as much as in retrospect, I would have loved to. I just love thinking Jesse Jackson running with Dukakis. What a show that would be. Do you remember for 10 trivia points, Dan Cohen, who Mike Dukakis took as his vice presidential candidate?
Lloyd Benson.
Very good, excellent. The senator from Texas, Cohen knows his stuff. And
I know. I knew John Kennedy.
yeah, right.
And you know John
You
Kennedy.
know John Kennedy. Benson's great moment in the debate with Dan
Right.
Quayle. All right, let's talk. But the interesting thing is, less DC experience works. That's the exact opposite tact that Amy Klobuchar used to her advantage on the debate stage, where she attacked Buttigieg for being insulting
Yep.
to and trivializing the great experience they had. So in the face of Donald Trump as a president, and he being an outsider who has just trashed all protocol that the president is supposed to hold, do you think that actually DC experience would help a Democrat in this race?
I don't think that it would, but the way that the DC experience gets described can be different for different candidates. Barack Obama doesn't break the model because while he was a U.S. senator, he beat a much longer serving U.S. senator in his election and in his primary election as well. But he certainly didn't feel like a DC insider. He was, the qualities of a candidate who can bring a message of significant change and reform to the system. He wasn't hindered by that in any way because of having been a U.S. senator. I think that Klobuchar brought up what she brought up, though, not to make that wasn't where she made her case. She made her case against Buttigieg and showing the sort of hypocrisy given, again, his message of unity and civility and all that. So it was a useful tactic at that moment within the debate. But it's one of the many questions. If we allow Donald Trump to run against someone who seems like the DC establishment, because even though he's president, which you would think would make someone seem like the DC establishment, he certainly does not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like with the draining the swamp. It's people still regurgitating that he's drained. In the meantime, I saw an article where he has had 281 lobbyists in his administration,
Unbelievable.
which is just an incredible number.
No, if you're a Donald Trump supporter, and I say this to all my dear MAGA hat wearing friends out there, you have to be willfully ignorant. You just got to be willfully ignorant.
Well, some of them can't help themselves.
Well,
They're just ignorant.
But
then there are a lot of willfully ignorant ones.
There's this a comedian who is on Comedy Central. He's on the Trevor Noah show all the time.
Clever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He goes and interviews Trump supporters, and
Yeah, no, that's a funny.
It is very funny because the utter inconsistency of what they're saying.
Right.
Like they'll be saying, like, if you study the transcript, you'll see that Trump is innocent. So say, well, have you studied the transcript? Oh, well, no, I haven't looked at the transcript. Well, then how do you know what the transcript says? Well,
I heard reports on it.
I heard reports on the transcript, and then they'll say you should have an independent mind about things, and then he'll say to them, well, but have you studied the transcript? In other words, they don't have an independent mind. Either. So the inconsistency of Trump voters, they just believe in Trump so much. They love Trump so much for who he is, for what he does, for how he plays the game, Dan Cohen, that they don't care if there's no logic or consistency.
I think it's important when thinking about any group of voters not to lump all of them together. There's a substantial number of people that voted for Barack Obama who voted for Donald Trump. A more substantial number who did not vote against him. Unlike, say, 2012, where you had a really small number of swing voters between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, there were a much more substantial number of swing voters in the 2016 election, and it was defined by they didn't like Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And that's not a usual situation for a general election and president. So going back to the idea of the competing theories and maybe developing a more complex theory about how to win the election in November, I don't think it's useful to just ignore the fact that there were some people who were comfortable voting for a Democratic candidate who then ended up, many who sat out, but many who ended up voting for Donald Trump, and making sure that we don't define every Donald Trump voter by the people who do display that ignorance and worse.
All right, let me sit corrected. I would say 90% of the Donald Trump voter. I would say, all right, you know what? 80% of the Donald Trump voter. Dan.
Even if it's 90, that's a margin of victory.
Explain that. That's a good
If
point.
10% of the people that voted for Donald Trump are swing voters that we could get back, we'd win the election. Now, I don't think that it's one thing. And I think that's, when I look at the dynamics of voters and start thinking about, what are the different ingredients where we can move things, some of it is turnout of the base. Some of it is large-scale voter registration drives and bringing new people into the process. And some of it might be looking at those swing voters and how many can be moved. And each election is unique, and you have to figure out, what is, how many of each group can you move? There are marginal changes with each of them.
Okay, Dan, I'd like to ask you this. What about Bloomberg? Yeah, let's start with that.
Let's go with Bloomberg,
Yeah, let's just
man.
go with that now.
Let's go with Bloomberg.
Can he buy the election?
I
And,
mean,
and I'm not using that as derisively as a lot of people do. Because he has done things. He was mayor of New York for 12 years. So, he has a record to go on and what have you. But he is Johnny-come-lately, and he is just going boldly forth into an area that nobody else is. I got the money and I'm going to spend it.
right. And that's his case to make. Each of the candidates has to make the case of why they can win in November. And it's great when you have a simple case. It's better when you have a simple case that a broader swath of people agree with. I think that's one of the challenges that Bernie Sanders is having right now. Michael Bloomberg has a simple case. I will throw billions of dollars at this thing to win. And a lot of people just say, oh,
Makes
money
sense to
wins
me.
elections. So sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Our rich guy can beat your rich guy.
Yeah.
Our rich guy really is rich.
Exactly right. Exactly.
In fact, Bloomberg's had that in a commercial, or he got that wisecrack off. There's two billionaires be running. If you go against Trump, there'll be two billionaires in a race, and he goes, "Who's the other one?" Bloomberg's got $1 million of them.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let me throw this one at you, Dan. Right now, when I mention Michael Bloomberg's name to my friends of the Bernie persuasion, and I have many of them, they're like, "No way." You were there last night at the at the bar where we had the show. No way. I'm not voting for him. But they never said they're going to vote for Donald John Trump. But I'll either leave it blank at the top. I'll vote third party. I'll see, what my third party options are. But no way am I going to vote for Michael Bloomberg. Now they're saying that right now it's February. Okay. How significant do you take that as a threat to Bloomberg's viability let's say he is the nominee come November?
I don't think it's a useful thing to focus on at this point, because someone will eventually be the nominee, and a lot of people will be disappointed that that person is the nominee, and we will have a process where we remember that Donald Trump is president, and there is one
He will
thing
remind
to do.
us. He will remind us.
Yeah. So,
That's the most motivating factor right there, irrespective of who the nominee is. Might one nominee or another be more motivation? Sure. But even that is not crystal clear. That's the Bernie Sanders case is, I will bring many more people into the process, and that's what will put us over the top. And the challenge right now, and I think that there's a really strong case to make for Bernie Sanders being one of the most viable candidates in the race. But
tell us that.
yeah, make the case.
Tell us that.
I want to hear the case.
I think that Bernie Sanders is a different kind of candidate than we've ever had be viable. I think that there can be an exuberance around him for some of his supporters that can put blinders on. I've seen just in the past few days, a lot of people announce Bernie Sanders has surged to first place nationally. With all respect, he surged to first place by the first place person falling below him. So he has struggled with
that'd be
that.
Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he has struggled to push that ceiling up much. However, his ceiling was being, called 15, 18%, then it was called 20%, then his ceiling has been moving up. I think that the biggest challenge for him is the nomination because people are skeptical. But, people don't trust Washington, D.C. insiders, and even though he's been there so long, he's immune to that. He just does not seem that kind of candidate. I think that he has the ability to broaden his appeal by clarifying certain things. Some of the scary words, revolution, socialism,
The revolution will not be televised.
Yeah, that's funny. Clarifying what I meant by revolution was not literally.
But that's the thing. I mean, I think that was one of the challenging things for him to define. So 4 years ago, he started getting mocked for using the term revolution. And in one of his speeches, he said, when you think about it, what I'm describing is exactly what the marriage equality movement, not that long ago. That's how that happened, and that with the women's movement and the suffrage movement and the civil rights movement. And so you're using this term revolution that people don't like, and I think that's because after radical things happen, they don't look radical anymore, so people forget that radical things happen because people go, oh, wait, that makes sense.
Wow.
So if he can define that, I think he does it sometimes. He could do it better. I think that would go a long way to get people to go, oh, that's not as scary.
And do you think there's a way he can define his way out of democratic socialism?
I think that that's a little bit less of a concern, honestly, because he gets to define what his platform is. And at some point, people are going to realize that he's not trying to overthrow capitalism.
Right. But yeah, and what I do on Facebook when I'm arguing with my ignorant Trump nuts is when they talk about socialism, what I do is cut and paste an article listing the 10 happiest countries in the world, and they are all socialist countries. What Trump is doing is using Venezuela as an example of bad socialism, but there's lots of good socialist countries. You pay more taxes or what have you, but you don't have to worry about being sick and losing your fortune. I mean, there's all sorts of advantages. In fact, I think it's Denmark where they pay you to go to college. You don't pay to go to college, but they pay you.
No, we have all sorts of socialistic operations in this country, and I'm not allowed to talk sports in this show, but I'm just going to say this weekend the NBA All-Star Game is coming to the city of Chicago. The NBA is a socialistic entity. They prohibit you have to get permission from the people who are in there to get in there. That's number one. And number two, they limit the amount of money anybody can spend on the players. So if that's not socialism, I don't know what it is, but it's, socialism that protects the interests of wealthy people. So it's not considered socialism. What is it? I don't know what they call
Tough
it.
capitalism.
Tough capitalism. They're looking out for the fans. That's what they always say. So people pick and choose with socialism. All right, now I'm going to reverse the question to you, Dan. So we talked about the Bernie people who say, if Bloomberg's a nominee, no way. All right, I'm not going to vote for him. Now let's reverse it. I got a lot of people of the moderate persuasion coming through this studio all the time. Joe Biden supporters, newly discovered Bloomberg supporters. So suddenly they got Bloomberg tattoos.
Tattoos?
Yeah, tattoos.
Oh, God.
We even had an Amy Klobuchar supporter in there, but it's just a matter of time. I think those are just going to be the Joe Biden supporters. They all, when we're off the mic, they don't say this on mic, they go, I can't stand Bernie Sanders. Can't stand Bernie Sanders supporters. And I read the New York Times, their spokespeople in the New York Times, Tom Friedman, just wrote a column in yesterday's New York Times. Bernie Sanders will be disaster. He can't win, blah, 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 blah. Let's say Bernie Sanders is the nominee. All these, my friends of the moderate persuasion, are they going to pull, you know what I mean? Are they just going to shut up and go along the same way, we expect the Bernie supporters to do the same for Bloomberg?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I will say that there's been a very clearly weaponized narrative that Bernie Sanders is horrible by a lot of establishment Democratic folks. It's and that becomes reality for people. So the vitriol is absurd when you have someone who's basically been pushing for an agenda that is a popular agenda. For decades, he's been consistent. He's, you watch films of him from decades ago. He's talking about the same issues. The rest of the Democratic Party has sort of been catching up to him. And all of a sudden, he's the devil incarnate. It's a little bit absurd. But in the same way that I brought up with the other side, someone will become the nominee. If it is Bernie Sanders, then those folks are going to have to take seriously there's a choice between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and they'll act accordingly. It'll be our job to get them not to defect. We're certainly not going to, on either side, whether it's like folks on the left or moderate folks concerned about the nominee, we're not going to shame them into coming on board and making sure that we can support Donald Trump. We're going to have to, reach out to them and offer them a very good reason. And I think that is not that difficult to do with Bernie Sanders once you get past the irrationality around the hatred toward him.
Let's go to the black vote.
All right, let's get to the black vote. Yeah, that's everything.
There was some black politician on. I saw getting interviewed, and he says that just like Trump could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and the Trump supporters would still vote for him, said Trump could heal somebody on Fifth Avenue and the black voters would still vote against him. I thought that was a great line.
Who said that?
I don't remember. Yeah,
but why would, I've said this already, Monroe, today, why would any black voter vote for Donald Trump except for, like Kanye or something,
the nuts and the self-haters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monroe Anderson said that. I didn't say that, but Monroe Anderson said. But Donald Trump denigrates black people almost every freaking day. And so why would a black voter vote for him? I don't understand why a Jewish voter would vote for him after what he said down in Miami or wherever it was to a room full of his Jewish supporters. So, but he does it. He just did that once with the Jewish supporters. He denigrates black people, Monroe, I would say once a week at least. You know what I mean? He's making fun of Maxine Waters,
Right.
Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
Go down the list. I mean, so why would a black person vote for him?
The thing that puzzles me is he's getting some amount of black men. Not a huge number, but he's getting some.
Don't even
do you
this.
see that,
Now we're going to go to the
see-
pollsters. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here not here. Now let's ask the question.
Yeah.
My position. I had this debate just Friday with Stacey Davis Gates, and Jeanette Taylor in the studio. And black men lie to pollsters when they say they're supporting Donald Trump, and that if you actually look at the voting results, real votes, you see no evidence whatsoever that there was any significant number of black men who voted for Donald Trump. If you take a look at the black wards of Chicago, which are overwhelmingly black, so you know it's not a white voter in there, Donald Trump is lucky to get 1.5, 1.4, 1.6, 1.7% of the vote. I don't care. There's no way he could have gotten upwards of 10% of the black male vote with a turnout of 1.7. So my conclusion is that black men lie to pollsters when it comes to Donald Trump. What's your thoughts, Dan Cohen?
I don't see any evidence that any demographic group is more or less dishonest. You have to look at, number one, people change their minds. Polls that are done well before an election, people can express frustration about something and then have time to think about it and take a look. I mean, general elections are obviously different from primaries, but you look at the polling from 2 days before New Hampshire versus the results, you had very substantial changes. That wasn't the polling being wrong, actually. That was people in the process of making up their minds, which they did for the 48 hours from the end of the last polls through the end of the polls being open. So people can express different things. I don't know. The polls in 2016, on balance, were actually pretty accurate. There were some states that they were more off than others, but Hillary Clinton had a lead of a few percent, which is almost what she ended up with, popular vote-wise. But then the last thing I'll say is, look, polling is imperfect, just like any other way that we try to analyze election trends. And so you have to be mindful. As a pollster, I was mindful of, okay, if there is some error that we have beyond just statistical error, where might it come from? What might we not be seeing? And then you ask, is there a way to capture that?
How are you polling the millennials with the cell phones? That must be difficult.
Polling is a lot more expensive right now because the cell phones you have to dial individually. It's so that the accuracy, there's no indication that there's a substantial reduction in accuracy, but it's certainly more expensive to do phone polling, which is why a lot of people have been looking at text message methodologies and online methods, and some of those are very promising, but it's kind of new in the field, so it takes a while to assess. If you look at, it's great now because you can go online and look at any poll aggregator and see the list of every poll that was done and what kind of methodology, and you can see just eyeballing it, depending on methodology, you'll get certain candidates doing, consistently doing better or worse, and then you can kind of reverse engineer who are the demographics that they do best with. So, like the Economist poll, Elizabeth Warren was always outperforming the other polls in the Economist, or the Emerson poll always had Bernie Sanders overperforming. And so you can look into the methodology, but, it's always imperfect because you can poll any group of whatever, 400, 500 individuals. If they are not the people ultimately who are going to show up and vote, and you got that part wrong and you're screening incorrectly, it's going to be inaccurate.
Let me ask this really quickly. The Gallup poll that has Trump at 49 now, do you think that's an outlier or do you believe it?
I would have to look back at some history on this, but Gallup has not been really good at national political polling. I mean, you can look at, there's things like 538 do a lot of pollster ratings and stuff where you can just look at the history of it, but we're going to have a lot of different polls that suggest many different realities in front of us. And that's also one of, when you think about the complex models of how you actually win these elections, any one of them could be correct. There's no honest, exact way to say Donald Trump has X support or X favorability. That's why you want to look at as much polling as possible. You want to look at the movement just as much as you're trying to predict. There's no prize for predicting the outcome, but there's a prize for finding the best way to increase your standing. Mm-hmm. So, the Gallup poll just, if I believe that, though it's usually adults that they poll, right? Not.
I think so.
Yeah. So that's another thing to.
Yeah, but they do it daily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's usually adults that they poll. Is that what you said?
I believe for Gallup. But I would have to double check.
Excuse my ignorance, but what do you mean by adults? I mean, isn't everybody?
So adults is anyone over 18. In fact, could even mean ineligible voters if you're just looking for how old someone is. Then there's registered voters, which is going to give you a smaller group, or likely voters, which you can get either from voting history or for these big races from screen questions. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an art more than a science itself, too, because you ask someone if they're going to vote, they'll usually overstate their likelihood of voting. But you can also ask them other questions, which you know from history. Do they know when the election is?
Yeah.
Do they know like other?
Yeah. Oh, the bar is low on these questions.
Well, no, but
who is the president?
Hey, that's no, but you. So they'll do the very good polls that screen that way will do 7, 8, 9 different questions and say, well, we know from history, people who got 6 of them right did end up voting.
Could you imagine if they did polls based on things like, all right, who was Mike Dukakis' running mate in 1988? God. Well,
Who is Mike Dukakis?
yeah, who is Mike Dukakis? That's a good point. Who is George Bush's running mate? I can't believe I still remember Dan Quayle. All right, Bloomberg's impact. This is what we were all talking about. As soon as the show was over last night, we had a show in a bar. We were a bunch of political junkies. As soon as it was, well, we were talking about it during the show. We talked about it after the show.
Yeah.
Monroe and I talk about this all the time. Monroe was suggesting before you got here that the black vote will move from Biden to Bloomberg
20% already has.
already,
Yeah.
Yes.
according to a poll.
Yeah.
All right. So your thought about Bloomberg's impact?
I think that Bloomberg ends Joe Biden's campaign. Full stop.
Yeah.
People have lost confidence, and the only hope that Biden had to continue was to hold on to his strong support among African American voters. But Bloomberg has cut into that. I think that would have been a little bit more challenging for Klobuchar or Buttigieg, but Bloomberg's able to do it, and it's really difficult to see how Biden sustains a sense of viability, declining both in the white and African American communities.
Wow. All right. What about his impact on Buttigieg?
I think Buttigieg, and I mean, now we have to include Klobuchar in the same category, just huge question marks there. The way that you campaign in Iowa and New Hampshire is a lot different from how you make the case to many millions of people in much bigger states that come a lot faster. And so
Yeah, Amy's going to have trouble because you got Super Tuesday coming up, and you need a truckload of money to deal with all those states at once. And you can't jump on a plane and go to all of them. So you have to be on the airwaves and on the internet. And she doesn't have the dough.
Yeah.
Mayor Pete has it, and Bernie has it.
See, here's the deal. Now, I don't know if the polls can reflect this. I always say this.
Yeah.
I've been saying this for a week, Monroe.
Yes.
If I'm a centrist voter, it's no contest. There's not a dime's worth of difference between Klobuchar, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, Biden on all the positions. I'm going with the guy with the money. If I'm a centrist voter, if you're centrist voters, basically don't rock the boat too much. Just put a candidate up who's not Donald John Trump. Just talk about how we can have civility back in government. We're not going to be tweeting out all the time. I'm not going to get rid of pre-existing conditions. Okay, this seems to be the world for centrist voters. We're not going to make promises that we can't keep, even though they make promises all the time that they can't keep.
Oh, yeah. You may not know this, but the culinary union in Vegas, in Nevada, is sending out letters on Bernie saying that if you vote for him, you're going to lose your health care. Because they fought very long and hard to get a very good health care.
They're the only union in the world that's making that as an issue, because everybody knows that health care through a business, through your employer, varies from contract to contract if you're lucky to have a contract, or varies from job to job if your employer's still in business. So any union that's going around saying, oh, we would rather have, we believe our members should rather give their wages to the insurance company as opposed to keeping their wages for themselves, is not really looking out for the best interest of its workers. And that's just my humble opinion as a guy who's in 2 unions. All right.
I think that was one of the most disingenuous attacks on Medicare for All that came up through the campaign. The idea that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren are trying to take away your health care. People are not in love with their insurance. They want to have good health care and have access to it and not go broke because of it.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah. That one really, I have a hard time with that one. All right. So black voters and Bloomberg. Monroe raised this topic earlier. Let's get a little deeper. The story broke yesterday. We were talking about it at the bar of the stop and frisk tape with Bloomberg. Some outrageous comments that Bloomberg made. Was it 2015, Monroe? I think it was 2015.
Yeah. On a radio show or something.
A radio show. How much of an apology tour does he have to go on? Doubling what I say he has to triple what J.B. Pritzker did, at least. It worked for Pritzker, right? Enough apologies
right.
for your sense of how black voters, how forgiving will black voters be? We'll start with you, Monroe.
See, my theory is that in order for Bloomberg to bring young blacks who are with Bernie right now over, he's going to have to come up with a program, an actual program that says he's going to have to pull an Elizabeth Warren and say, I got a program for that where police will be trained not to do it. They will be trained how to address young black men, et cetera, but along those lines.
How do you see
No,
it?
I mean, I think that's I agree completely. What I have always seen is there's a substantial difference in policy attitudes and other attitudes based on age within the African American community, and the younger activist folks. That's a big deal. That's you're disqualified if that's and that's not just African American young activists. There's a lot of progressive white activists as well who will look at something like that as disqualifying immediately. I have seen it get more complicated. If you think back, I mean, here, why the issue about when Chuy Garcia was running for mayor against Rahm Emanuel, and the first commercial that he aired was about the 1,000 new cops.
Yeah.
And there was such a disparity between his activist base, who had a lot of questions about whether that was the smart thing. In the polling, though, a lot of older African Americans, older Latinos, thought that was great.
Yeah. No,
So the way
you're
that
absolutely right.
plays is very interesting.
And then standard again, back to conventional wisdom. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. So who really cares about young people? That's conventional wisdom, Monroe. I'm just throwing that
Except
out there.
younger people are voting more nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost doubled, I think, right?
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. No. See, that's why I say people are too quick to underestimate Bernie, because he's got real troops. He's got real people with strong allegiance, and they're going to go. They come to the show. They've already knocking on doors in Iowa. They'll go out to Wisconsin. They'll go out to Michigan. These swing states, Dan. And I think it's really the Democrats do a disservice to themselves to just underestimate that and just go to conventional wisdom. Well, he's a socialist. He can't win.
Right.
And it's it's kind of cynical, man. You know what I mean? We always tell people, oh, register, believe in the system, go vote, da-da-da. Then when people actually do it, they go, well, you can't win.
One word, McGovern.
Oh, man. Okay, we're not even going to go there. Dan, that's old people talking. Monroe and I are from a different generation than you, all right?
No, I think that, there has not recently been, well, I shouldn't even say recently. Barack Obama in 2008 had a very large, passionate, active, and diverse base who were willing to do the work for him, and it paid off, and he became president. And Bernie Sanders' base, despite all of the other differences between the two of them, that's what Bernie Sanders' activist base looks like. He has an incredibly diverse among, and any way you want to spread out what that means.
Right now it's much smaller.
Then
He's in the
Obama's
30s, right? Yeah.
Well, you can't compare what was basically, I think, a two-person race to a crowded field like this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so a lot of people were saying, wow, Bernie Sanders broke 50% in New Hampshire last time, and this time he only got 25.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, in fairness, a whole bunch of candidates.
Yes, absolutely true. All right, last question before we break for the day. And this is something that came up last night. I don't know, Dan, if you were the one who said it, but I can't remember who said it. Brokered convention.
Huh.
Wow. There's even I, as old as I am, have never lived through a brokered convention. Do you think there's going to be a brokered convention, Dan?
I think that there's a really good chance that there's going to be a brokered convention. One of the interesting things that happened yesterday, when the Warren campaign seemed to know that it was going to have a low showing, and they released a very comprehensive thing to their campaign supporters and volunteers that laid out this case that they're in it for the long game and they have the resources to continue. But the interesting thing about it was, well, that's an effective reminder for folks if her play is for a brokered convention. When she talks about unifying the party, right, which is quite different from unifying the country, which is what Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and other people talk about. When she talks about that seems to send a signal that her play is stay in long enough for brokered convention. But at this point, it's early to tell, except there's no special reason that any one of at least the top 5 and maybe more stay kind of viable through Super Tuesday. And if they split up states, like that practically guarantees a brokered convention right there.
Monroe, your thoughts? Brokered convention?
No, I don't think so.
You don't see it?
Yeah, I don't see
The
it.
closest in my lifetime, and I'm thinking about it, and this is before your time, Dan, but Monroe, you'll remember the 68. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June of 68 in California. After the California primary, he won. My guess, we could have been heading toward a brokered convention in 68 because I'm not sure Humphrey would have had the ability to defeat Bobby Kennedy. I'm not sure Bobby Kennedy would have had to defeat the momentum to beat. But I don't know. That's ancient history. And
And I think Bobby would have took it had he lived. I think he would have been the candidate.
Well, we will never know.
Right, exactly. I know.
Monroe Anderson, every Wednesday on the show, a great guest has been predicting Donald Trump's downfall since the moment Donald Trump was sworn into office. God bless Monroe Anderson. Dan Cohen's first time out. Man, Joanna and Carlos weren't kidding. You did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
For coming on the show. And, of course...
Well, before we get out of here, we got to read our poll results. We had a poll on the Ben Joravsky Show Facebook page. Big thanks to everybody who weighed in with their vote. The question that was asked on the Ben Joravsky Show Facebook page, by the way, you should go like that page, at Benny J Show, BENNY, the letter J Show. The question posed, a simple one. Will you vote blue, no matter who? That was the question.
Okay.
We had a lot of great comments. Very smart-minded people here on the Ben Joravsky Show. Leela says, more important than ever now. Would you agree with that, Ben?
Yes. I'm voting blue no matter who. I'm putting it out there.
Listen to this clever response. Denise puts, absolutely. Pretty good.
Send her a car.
Well, we're not winning it. I'll get the car, all right? If we have a car. I take the bus every day. All right. Finally, our poll results here. 23% will vote blue. Will not vote blue, no matter who.
Yeah.
77% will vote blue, no matter who.
All right. Good to know. My listeners are in tune with me on that one. I'm voting blue no matter who. And, I'm going to be moaning and groaning if it's a centrist. I'll be complaining, Dan Cohen, and, oh, God, this guy. But push come to shove, I'll vote blue no matter who.
I'm predicting another blue wave.
You did predict that last
right,
time.
Exactly. For
he
2018.
predicted that in 2018.
Yeah, and I'm predicting we're going to get the House, we're going to get the Senate, and we're going to get the White House.
Whoa. What are you drinking? Can I have some of it?
And they're all going to get a Mustang.
They're all going to get a blue Mustang. All right, Monroe Anderson, we'll leave with that great prediction. Thank you very much. Dan Cohen, thank you very much. And, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, the pride and joy of Alton, Illinois. And as Dan Cohen can tell you, back home in Alton, they call him White Lightning. Give yourself a raise. Take it out of petty cash. See you tomorrow, everybody.
And remember, you can download previous Ben Joravsky shows and Benny J bonus interviews at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites and wherever else you download your favorite podcasts. Downloaders, we live stream this program, right? It's true. Tuesdays through Fridays, 1 until 3 p.m. Central Time at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites and the Chicago Sun-Times YouTube channel. When you go on the YouTube channel, you can join us in the live stream chat room. Hey, who knows? We may give you a shout out and mention your comments if you want your language. Join us on the live stream chat. Join us live. Download us. And thank you for listening.